After Charlie Chaplin and Joan Barry broke up, she filed a paternity suit against him. Chaplin argued that he was not the father of Barry's child, but the final verdict was the most shocking twist of all. The latter end of cinema's silent film era was a tumultuous time for many reasons, and right smack dab in the middle of it was Charlie Chaplin. As one of history's greatest rags to riches stories, Charlie fought his way into the film world and became known as a titan of comedy. However, his desire to make his films more realistic and topical led to significant backlash, especially given his numerous other scandals. Those who were able to meet Charlie Chaplin, or even just watch his films, likely saw how effortlessly he executed his unique brand of comedy, almost like he was born for it. In fact, there may be some truth to that, since all the talents and gumption of an entertainer were inherent family traits. Born on April 16, 1889, Charlie's parents were both actors and singers, who certainly influenced his path in life. Still, this didn't make things much easier for him. By the time he was about 2, Charlie's parents had separated, leaving his mother, Hannah, to raise her children on her own for the most part. As this was during the tail end of the Victorian era, life was far from easy. With little finances to go around, young Charlie had no choice but to spend his days at workhouses. Tragically, there were even darker days ahead. In 1898, Charlie's life was turned upside down when his mother's health took a chilling turn. As a result of malnutrition and syphilis, Hannah developed psychosis and wound up in a mental institution. Both Charlie and his brother Sidney had no choice but to live with their volatile father, who was known to be a heavy drinker. Unfortunately, this was only the beginning of the nightmare. Though Charlie eventually escaped the horror show of his father's home when his mother recovered, his father perished 2 years later. Even worse, he had little time left with his mother. Hannah was ultimately doomed to spend the rest of her days in an institution, as she eventually relapsed permanently in 1905. In lieu of such misfortune, 14-year-old Charlie Chaplin had learned to be quite the independent young man. Behind the scenes of his tragic childhood, he had already found a home on the stage. Thanks to his mother's talent and encouragement, Charlie began performing when he was just 5 years old. He went on tour with a clog dancing troupe, but deep down, he wanted to do more than just dance. By the time his mother's health hit the point of no return, Charlie had already fostered a full-fledged ambition to succeed as an actor. Setting his sights on London's West End, he signed up with a theatrical agency. It was a move that changed his life forever. The manager of the theatrical agency recognized that young Charlie Chaplin had star potential and gave him a role in Jim, a Romance of Cockaigne. Overall, the play was a total flop, but there was one actor who stood above the rest. Critics adored Charlie's comedic performance. This slew of good reviews caused a mighty ripple effect for his career. Charlie entertained success right out of the gates, working on several productions throughout his teen years. By the time he was 18, he was no longer an amateur performer. He also had a very important connection in his corner, his brother Sidney, who was also an actor. Luckily, a major turning point came when Sidney secured him one of the biggest opportunities of his life. Thanks to Sidney's reputation, Charlie was well recommended to join Fred Karno's comedy company. Karno, however, was quite hesitant to hire him at first, thinking that the young actor looked much too shy to do any good in the theater. It only took one jaw-dropping performance at the London Coliseum to silence these doubts. Charlie Chaplin signed a contract with the company. He was finally off to the races. With Fred Karno's company, Charlie became a shining jewel on their roster. He was lucky enough to travel to America, where he performed in 2 tours in the early 1910s. In the second of these, he made an impression on another industry representative, this time with Keystone Studios. Looking to replace one of their actors, the film studio met with Charlie and signed him to a contract in 1913. Unfortunately, his debut wasn't exactly what he had hoped for. Signing up for a contract of $150 a week, Charlie wouldn't see his first bout of work until several months later, when he began production on the aptly named 1914 film, Making a Living. Often describing the studio's films as crude, Charlie's attitude didn't change, and he finished this debut project of his with a bad taste in his mouth, despite the praise he received for it. Luckily, he soon found his identity. Moving on from his first on-screen appearance, Charlie began working on the film Mabel's Strange Predicament, in which he had more control over his character. Intricately selecting each piece of his costume, Charlie created the character of the Tramp, which would forever remain his most iconic on-screen personality. With this, he was on track to take full control. Only a few months after his debut, producer Mark Sennett trusted Charlie enough to give him the directorial reins of the upcoming film Caught in the Rain. Upon its release, Sennett was happy to see that he made the right call. He rewarded Charlie's success with the freedom to serve as both actor and director for nearly every short film he made with the studio. Still, he wasn't a man who stayed in one place for long. With Keystone Studios, Charlie reached a point where he was directing and acting in one film per week, but upon requesting a raise from $150 to $1,000, Sennett refused. So Charlie decided to look elsewhere, which was fortunate for the S&E Film Manufacturing Company, which offered to pay him $1,250 a week. Naturally, Charlie accepted. One of his next projects led to an impactful encounter. After signing on with S&E, Charlie got to work immediately and built up a team of comedic actors whom he could regularly rely on. However, for his second film at the studio, A Night Out, he still needed a leading lady. Fortunately for him, he found the right actress when he saw Edna Purviance by chance at a cafe and thought she was beautiful. She proved to be a key player in more than just his professional life. From the moment Edna Purviance agreed to star in Charlie's films, the two of them began working quite closely, which soon led to more than just a friendship. Rumors spread about their behind-the-scenes relationship, which ultimately proved to be true, as she starred in many of his films until both their professional and romantic relationship ended in 1917. By 1915, Charlie's Tramp character had appeared in 25 of his films, but he wasn't totally pleased with the portrayal. Audiences had come to expect the Tramp to be a more unkind character, and as a result, they started giving more negative feedback. In response, Charlie officially changed his character in The Tramp and played him as a more caring man. He clearly knew what he was doing. As he continued to pump out films throughout 1915, Charlie began to receive a lot more attention from audiences and critics alike, and his following quickly increased. He was more than just a movie star, as other businesses soon capitalized on his character and image and became the first among cinema stars to reach international fame. Of course, this also meant some negative publicity was inevitable. Although Charlie had become one of the most sought-after movie stars in the world, he wasn't immune to public scrutiny. American media may have been in love with him, but the arrival of World War I prompted the press in Britain to call him out for not fighting in conflict. In his words, he was ready for either the US or Britain to call him to action, but neither did. Somehow, he had even higher to climb. Between 1915 and 1917, Charlie had worked with another film company that had given him his own studio to work out of, a privilege he was eager to keep up. So, when he then signed with the First National Exhibitors Circuit, he used the $1 million they gave him to build his own Charlie Chaplin Studios just off Sunset Boulevard. Suddenly, his next big scandal surfaced. By his late 20s, Charlie had become one of the highest paid individuals in the world until his first real controversy arose. In 1918, a 16-year-old actress named Mildred Harris announced that she was pregnant with Charlie's child. Trying to prevent a massive scandal, Charlie married her away from the public eye. Obviously, this was not a good decision. Not long after the marriage, the reality of the situation came to light with the revelation that Mildred wasn't actually pregnant. However, by the time Charlie discovered this, Mildred was pregnant for real and gave birth to Norman Spencer Chaplin in 1919. Sadly, Norman passed in infancy, and the miserable union of Charlie and Mildred ended the following year. Still, it wasn't long before he found someone else. Around the time that Charlie began production on his next film for First National, The Idle Class, He hired an actress named Mary Collins to be his secretary. Once again, he failed to keep things professional, and the studio soon announced to the public in 1921 that the two of them had become engaged. That wasn't meant to last, though. In a surprising twist of fate, Charlie and May wouldn't make it anywhere close to exchanging vows. Only 2 months after their engagement, Charlie's attitude toward his fiancée changed drastically. Apparently, he'd already grown sick of her and came up with a diabolical way of ending things. Charlie Chaplin decided to ghost May. He simply stopped coming to the set and claimed to be ill until May realized her engagement was over. In a matter of a few years, however, he was back in the middle of a scandal. Now 35 years old, Charlie became involved with an unfortunately familiar controversy when another 16-year-old actress named Lita Gray told him she was pregnant with his child. However, this time it was true, and the announcement came around the time that Charlie was making his film, The Gold Rush, which she was originally going to star in. Just as before, he tried to keep things under wraps. If the truth of Lita's pregnancy made its way to the authorities, Charlie could potentially face charges under California law, so he tried his best to avoid publicity. As such, he went to Mexico and arranged a marriage between himself and Lita in 1924, before she gave birth to their first child, Charles Spencer Chaplin III. However, it didn't take long for things to reach a breaking point. Lita and Charles had another child, Sidney Earl Chaplin, in 1926, but their marriage wouldn't last the rest of the year. Naturally, this was yet another horrible union, and even Charlie was in such a wretched state that he barely spent time at home. This was for the best, as Lita soon realized she deserved better, so she took their children and left. Their marriage wouldn't stay a secret forever. Despite his efforts, Charlie couldn't avoid the truth completely, and Lita officially filed for divorce in 1927. Shortly after, her application leaked to the public, alerting them to all the wicked things she was accusing Charlie of. Still, while there was a rising sentiment of banning his films, he had enough fans that it didn't take long for the whole incident to fall into obscurity. Meanwhile, the industry was experiencing a significant shift. Charlie had risen to the very top of the silent film era, but that time was quickly coming to an end, and change wasn't always welcome. With the technological advent of sound films, many eagerly embraced these talkies. However, others like Charlie voiced their opposition, claiming that the new form of filmmaking paled in comparison to the art of silent films. Unfortunately for him, his confidence in his craft took a hit. Despite being a staunch advocate of silent films, Charlie still grew nervous about their potential. This only worsened with the preview of his newest project, City Lights, which was met with a more negative reception than he was comfortable with. However, once he took it to the media, all the critics did was praise his skill and express defiance toward the new sound pictures. Behind the scenes, his personal life took another shocking turn. Having spent nearly a decade alone, Charlie was ready for another relationship, which came along once again as he was casting for his upcoming film, Modern Times, taking on the 21-year-old actress Paulette Goddard as his co-lead in the movie. The two of them began a romantic relationship almost immediately. Soon after, they traded the hustle and bustle of Hollywood for a life abroad. Charlie and Paulette worked on several projects going forward, but after the first film, they decided it would be best to get away for a bit. Becoming increasingly private people, they wanted to get as much distance from the spotlight as possible and traveled to the Far East in 1936. Unbeknownst to the press, the two of them married while on this journey. Having traveled the world, the state of it began to weigh on Charlie more and more. Through learning about global events from the comfort of Hollywood and then witnessing the state of the world throughout his travels, Charlie grew more invested in the geopolitical landscape. Specifically, the rise in militaristic nationalism in several countries deeply disquieted him. And even though it upset some audiences, this passion and fear found a place in his films. Unfortunately, he also bore a strong resemblance to someone evil. Eventually, many started to point out similarities between Charlie and another man who was quickly gaining notoriety in the world, the new ruler of Germany. These similarities included details like a shared life story of rags to riches and being born 4 days apart, as well as their appearances, since the ruler and the tramp had the same mustache. At last, Charlie relented to the new age. Inspired by the comparisons between himself and the ruler, Charlie got the idea for his next film, The Great Dictator, but he would be making some serious changes. Finally warming up to the concept of sound films, he realized that if he were to depict the kind of message he was looking for properly, people would actually need to hear it. As a satirical view of the ruler, Charlie was sure to include his brand of comedy. However, he also ended the film on a more severe note, where his character delivers a 5-minute speech against fascism and conflicts. His relationship was also in an unstable place. As had become familiar, Charlie and Paulette Goddard worked together again when she played a lead in The Great Dictator. But something was different. As they both were prone to throwing themselves wholeheartedly into their work, neither had much time for anything else. After a few years of slowly losing their spark, this divide pushed them to divorce in 1942. But their cooling chemistry wasn't the only thing that contributed to their breakup. Even before Charlie and Paulette's divorce, their loss of love was clear, since he had started courting another woman a year earlier. This relationship with the 21-year-old Joan Barry was much more casual, but that didn't seem to satisfy her at the end of the day, and she pursued him with an obsessive love. Finally, he had had enough. Joan Barry had dreams of being an actress, and Charlie intended to make her his next leading lady. However, he saw her as inexperienced, so he constantly worked to improve her acting skills to no avail. According to some accounts, Joan developed a drinking problem and stopped coming to acting class, which pushed Charlie to end things between them. However, Joan proved to be an even bigger problem for Charlie than he realized. Following their split, Joan became more obsessive, and her stalking even led to intervention by law enforcement several times. In a familiar twist, she then asserted she was pregnant with Charlie's child, a notion he adamantly refuted. Still, after giving birth to her daughter, Carol Ann, Joan filed a paternity suit to prove that Charlie was the father. As we'll see, the trial did not go as planned. Undoubtedly due to Charlie's strong political leanings and willingness to publicize them, the FBI grew suspicious of where his allegiances truly lay, but his fame was a sort of shield. To ruin his image, director J. Edgar Hoover used his scandal with Joan Barry to imply that Charlie was guilty of violating several laws. He even went as far as to name Charlie in 4 indictments. Charlie's luck didn't improve in 1944, when Joan's paternity suit went to trial and the prosecution seemed to be out for blood. Being accused of moral turpitude, Charlie submitted to a series of blood tests, which revealed he was not the father. Shockingly though, the court ruled these tests inadmissible and ordered him to pay child support. As it turns out, Joan wasn't the only one Charlie had in mind as a lead for his new movie, since he had also met a 17-year-old actress named Una O'Neill. All while the controversy surrounding him and Joan was happening, the now 54-year-old Charlie and Una had begun a relationship. Before long, they eloped and announced their marriage. Meanwhile, he hadn't finished interweaving his films with deeper meanings. All the trials and scandals had taken their toll on Charlie's mental state, and he didn't make another film until 1946, when he commenced production of Monsieur Voodoo. Releasing the following year, the film again provided commentary on the society around him, specifically the world's complacency towards conflict and capitalism. Unfortunately for him, this only fanned the flames. Charlie was already in hot water from the Joan Barry scandal, and his marriage to a woman 36 years his junior didn't help. But Monsieur Voodoo's release sealed his fate. The film's anti-capitalist message only provoked more contention, giving the media fuel to accuse Charlie of being a communist, and the FBI reason to launch an official investigation. Needless to say, Charlie was fed up. From then on, it was clear his career wouldn't be the same. If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want to say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.